Hey everybody, welcome back to Nikki T Live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with Jim Bennett. I did say that right, right? It is Bennett, right?
It is, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm usually good asking names right before the stream, but I think I didn't have enough coffee yet. So, anyways,
It's all good. It's one
great
of
to
those
have you,
mornings,
Jim.
isn't it? It's good.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
good to be here, Nick. Yeah. I know it's Monday morning.
yeah.
I'm seriously mainlining the caffeine at the moment. So
Yeah, no, cheers, cheers. Yeah, so for folks who might not know who you are, Jim, would you mind just giving, I guess, a brief introduction, and maybe how you got into tech if you're interested in going there too, and tell us where you're at these days, and then we can kind of dig into stuff from there.
yeah, sure. So I'm a principal developer advocate at a small startup called liblab, which focuses on automatic SDK generation. And appropriately enough, our mascot is a llama. So
Yeah,
the fact you have the llama down there,
yeah, it's for
yeah,
yeah,
the right way,
yeah.
the llama down there.
It's kind of funny. I saw you tweet that out, and I didn't want to be a reply guy, but it's actually an alpaca. it's
Oh,
it's
oh, I'm
no,
sorry.
but no, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, llamas are amazing too. It's just really funny. I'm in the east coast of Canada. I'm in Montreal, and for some reason, like literally about an hour outside of the, because Montreal's pretty big, one of the big cities in Canada. As soon as you go out about an hour, there is a ton of alpaca and llama farms. Not for the meat,
Really?
but like the wool.
Hmm.
And like I gotta say, not that I really knit or anything, but like one of my daughters is big into knitting, and my mother bought her wool for Christmas once, and is like alpaca wool, and it is incredibly expensive. So it's kind of like
Hmm.
creme de la creme when it comes to wool or fur. So, but yeah, I get to see them. Usually, there's like a it's like a fair. It's called the Brome Fair. It's about, like I said, about an hour and 15 minutes outside of Montreal if you go southeast, and there's always alpacas, llamas, all kinds of other animals as well. But I don't know. I have this particular one because we were at an alpaca farm, and just it's partially the color of the fur on their face and the way it almost looks like the alpaca is smirking at you, or just kind of being mischievous. So I just, for whatever reason, one day, I'm not a designer. I was just like, I'm gonna use this as my air quotes branding, I guess. So
I mean, it is cool. It is cool. And apologies for not knowing the difference between an alpaca
oh,
and
no, no,
a
no,
llama.
no. Like I said, I really didn't want to be a reply guy, but in case there's like alpaca lovers in the stream, I just wanted to clarify that. That's all. Awesome.
Yeah, I've no idea why LibLab has llamas, by the way. We keep getting asked this question, why the llama? And I've even gone to
Okay.
the CEO and said, why the llama? And it's just, have
Yeah.
yet to get an actual answer. But that's for some reason the company mascot. It was
Yeah.
actually a lot of fun. We were at a conference, API World in Santa Clara back in October, and my
Okay.
boss decided that we should get a llama mascot. So he dressed up in a llama costume. So
Oh,
he was
no way.
running around this conference in one of these really big ones where kind of your eyes are halfway up the necks, the heads are all the way up here, and he's just running around getting photographs of the people dressed as a llama. So it was
That's amazing.
brilliant. If anyone folks want to check out our LinkedIn page, you will see on there all these pictures of different people posing with the llama. It's just it was brilliant. Everyone wanted the llama selfie. It's so cool. But
Yeah, no,
yeah,
they're just really welcoming animals, and even a mascot. Yeah, somebody in the chat, I don't know who it is, NXIA618 says llamas unite. So also, I don't know how old you are, but I feel like we're similar in age. I'm Gen X, and like Winamp whoops the llama's ass. I feel like you probably had
mhm.
Winamp at some point. So
I may have used that with totally legal MP3s that I legally owned. I used to play those with Winamp. Yeah,
yeah,
I remember that. Yeah.
it's so funny. Like speaking of MP3s, because I had well, we had like a PC clone when I grew up. My father was an
Mhm.
accountant, so like Lotus 123 and stuff. That's kind of how I delved into computers. I originally, like, I didn't do programming, but it was like I was just building pie charts in Lotus because it was the only thing I had to do in terms. There was no games or anything. So, but eventually, uh, in when I was a teenager and I was working, I saved up my money from working in the restaurants to buy a 486 PC, and this was like close around the time where MP3s, I think maybe 6 months later they came out, and then eventually Napster and all that stuff. But I remember trying to play the CD-ROM in my 486 and it would skip because the CPU couldn't handle it. And then
Mhm.
my girlfriend at the time, she got a newer computer, just a Pentium, and she was able to play it. So it was just kind of funny that that one upgrade, and now it's something you take for granted, obviously. But anyways, yeah, it's pretty wild how far we've come with computers. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember those days. And that was actually my, I think I'm probably slightly older than you. That was kind of my later generation of computers. I started with a ZX Spectrum.
okay,
We didn't even have pie charts on that thing. It literally came with this big book where you would have to type in games to play.
okay,
Um,
okay.
if that, you'd buy them on a cassette tape and you put the cassette in,
Oh
wait
yeah,
7 minutes for it to load.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
true. I remember we did have a prior computer. We had a VIC 20, and that one didn't have cassettes. But my friend had a Commodore 64, and
hmm
he had video games, and they were on cassettes, and it's pretty wild. But
Yeah, and I hear allegedly you could actually pirate games by getting those twin tape player things and then putting the game in there and the blank tape and copying from one to the other. Obviously, that's highly
allegedly,
illegal, and I never ever did that. But I hear that certain unsavory types may have done that
yeah.
to get free games at
Yeah,
various
well,
points.
it's good to even though we don't know each other that well. I'm glad to know you aren't an unsavory type that would have done that. So cool, cool.
But yeah, but I guess that
Uh,
was kind of, yeah, you saying earlier about, yeah, how I started in tech. That was really kind of what started me off, was the fact that you got the Spectrum, and games used to be, a good game would be like £10 back in the day, and back in
okay,
1985 that was a lot of money for
yeah,
as a kid my pocket money was like 50p, so it would take me 20 weeks to save up for a game. But yeah, the Spectrum came with a basic interpreter, so you get a book and you literally type in the game, so they're typing
okay, yeah,
Hangman or what have you from the book, and that's how you'd get into games. And I always have to give a shout out to my mum here. I do this every time whenever I talk about how I got into tech. So
yeah,
when I first started typing these games in, I was quite young, 6, 7 years
okay,
old, no attention span. So my mum would help me, and she was not a programmer, no interest in that
okay.
at all. But like, I would type in some of Hangman, then she would type some in, and I would type some in, and she would type some in. So with her help, we got the games put in there.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I just always have to give a shout out to my mum for just helping, because without that, I wouldn't have had the love of writing software, because I couldn't have, at that age, my attention span would have just given up. I wouldn't have completed it. So I have to give
Yeah,
that shout out to my mum.
no, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. I never really got into computers when I was younger. It was, I mean, like I said, we had a VIC 20 and stuff, and I would do some basic where you just print your name multiple times across the screen and stuff. And uh, at one point, we had a dot matrix printer, and we're printing out those long banners with, I think it was Paint Pro, or I forget what the Paint Shop Pro. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, it was only really later, like when I was like 17 or 18. I honestly didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I was at CEGEP, which is like pre-university in Quebec where I'm at, and
Mhm.
I was in pure and applied sciences, and then I failed a couple courses because I was basically spending too much time with a girlfriend at the time, and then I ended up taking courses instead, and I ended up being in creative arts. But at that time, at least, maybe the programs changed, but you could literally take whatever you want. And I ended up taking a couple calculus courses. I always did well in math, and I took a C++ course, and it wasn't anything super advanced. Like the final exam was draw a Christmas tree with stars, like just basically looping and making it get bigger
Mhm.
and bigger. And I did well in that, and that was literally the only reason why I decided to go into computer science. But even when I was in university, I was still like, I don't know, maybe. But I think, at least for me, the one thing that kept me in tech was I was always fascinated by the internet, like web pages and stuff like GeoCities. I remember having to call my ISP because like when you had your counters on your page, when people visited,
Hmm. Yeah.
and at the time they were Perl scripts like the CGI bin and
God, yeah, I
and
remember all that. Yeah.
yeah, and I
Oh.
remember I'm like I found a book on it, or I might have been on a BBS to figure out how to write the script, and then I was like, okay, it's perfect, and then I would FTP it to my ISP, and then I tried to run it, and nothing was happening, and I had to literally call the ISP to say, can you give this script read write permission so it can update the counter, and all I can say is we've come a long way.
Yes, yes. You don't have to phone up AWS and say, "Can you give me read write permissions on my Perl script
Yeah.
anymore?" Do you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Can you allow
God,
me
I remember
write access to
GeoCities.
S3?
Yeah, because yeah,
Yeah,
the back then is when you used to get those under construction animations, didn't you? Everyone always had the under construction animation of someone digging
yeah,
something, and you're always part of like a web circle. So there was like 20 or so pages on the same thing that were all part of the same web circle you could go through, and
yeah.
oh, oh god, that I mean, the scary thing is, I remember seeing all that, and that was like 30 years or almost 30 years ago.
Oh yeah, no, it's time definitely flies, but yeah, it was the web that always just kept me interested, and been doing web stuff ever since then. Started off in the .NET ecosystem, like did a lot of ASP.NET, even ASP pages back in the day before .NET. But yeah, no, it's I say this to people all the time now. Like, even though things have gotten more complex, I think it's an amazing time to be a developer. And now you also have AI tools, which you got to take them with a grain of salt sometimes. But I leverage them every day. Whether it's just I'm trying to figure something out, and it's more like almost kind of like virtual pair programming sometimes, and sometimes the code is perfect, like I don't need to tweak it or anything, but sometimes I'm like, I know this isn't right, but it actually got my brain churning to go the right direction. So yeah, great
Yeah,
time to
those
be a
AI tools
developer.
are very, very helpful. I kind of see them like a bit of a smarter Google.
Hmm.
I mean, I've been using Copilot locks before liblab was working for Microsoft, so we kind of got early access to Copilot and free
Yeah.
access and all that, and just the whole Copilot chat of I'm reading someone else's code. I have no idea what this is doing. Into Copilot chat, explain this code, and it gives you
Yeah.
a break. Ah, yep. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's powerful. And just all the daft stuff. It's like I do a lot of stuff where I have to write documentation, and I have to do an
Yeah.
example in JSON and YAML. And so I'd write it in JSON, highlight that, and just, hey, Copilot, convert this to YAML, and it spits it out in YAML.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like,
It's
this is
perfect for that.
so easy.
Yeah.
And the other one I find is magic is I had a list of bullet points and I want to convert this to a table. So you start writing the
Okay.
table, and you start writing the first bullet point as if, instead of copying and pasting, I just start typing it. And Copilot knows that I want to convert all those bullet points to a table. I just tab, and it will just go
Yeah.
through and copy all the contents as bullet points into the right columns of the table. And it's just like, it's magic. It is literally magic. It saves me so much time of doing the boring stuff.
Yeah. I'm just seeing in the chat on one of the platforms that my volume might be down a little bit, so I'm just gonna make sure my volume it's up most of the way, but let me just see if I can crank it up. Okay, I'll see if anybody else lets me know, but I think it's only on LinkedIn that's the case because nobody else seems to have mentioned it, but. Also, Jim's the guinea pig today. It's the first time I'm streaming on 4 platforms, so there's that as well. And speaking of terrible segue, not platform, but SDKs. Let's talk
Yes.
about SDKs. So I guess I guess even before we get into liblab, um, I know like earlier on in my career, and also there's people with different levels of experience in the chat. Like, could you maybe explain what an SDK in your own words is? Because I know sometimes people have confused like SDKs with APIs or other kind of constructs in the software development land. So maybe if you could elaborate on that, and then we can dig into liblab.
Yeah, sure. So with an SDK, SDK stands for Software Development Kit, and essentially it is a helpful library someone has built for you to help you do something. So somebody has created a thing, and this thing can be an API. This thing
Yeah.
can be a piece of hardware. This thing could be a UI component that you want to put on the screen. And then instead of making you access it the hard way,
Yeah.
they write some code that sits in between that you can use to talk to that thing in the programming language of your choice.
Okay. Yeah.
So a good example is if you have a piece of hardware, you've bought I don't know, it's early in the morning. My brain's gone blank, but yeah, you have a piece of
It's
hardware
all good.
something. And so you are like a hardware manufacturer and you sell this device for doing, I don't know, for scanning people's eyes, for example, looking at people's eyes for medical problems in their eyes or what have you. And somebody wants to integrate that with their own software. So you buy
Yeah.
this hardware, you want to connect it to your software. Rather than having to kind of talk over USB and send all the different commands over USB, they've written this abstraction layer
Hmm.
that they call an SDK that you can call. And then if you're writing
Yeah.
code in Java, you would use their Java SDK that has got an abstraction layer that talks to the medical device. If you
Yeah.
are a C# programmer, there'll be a C# SDK that is that abstraction layer that talks to the device. So these SDKs provide an abstraction layer. It's, I have this thing, be it physical piece of hardware, a component that goes on screen, an API, what have you. I have this, and then to make it easier for you to talk to this, I've written the code for you in your programming language of choice for you to talk to that.
Okay.
So when we think about it with like an API, for example, if you have an API, you have
Yeah.
a load of REST endpoints. So here are this is a URL you can call. This is the data you have to send. This is the data you get back. And yes, you could fire up requests in Python and make the call and get some JSON back and convert that to an object. Or you could fire up an HTTP client in C#, make the call, get the JSON back, convert it to an object.
Yeah.
You can do all this stuff the hard way. Or you can have an SDK where somebody has basically written the code that does that for you. So this code
Okay.
will call the API for
Yeah.
you. It'll give you a method called get users, for example, and under the hood it knows to call the /users endpoint with a get request. So it will call that. It knows what data you have to take, like a user ID maybe if you want one user, and it knows the JSON that comes back, and it will automatically convert that to a class for you. So you've got that in the right format. So it's the code that sits in between. And then of course when you're calling an API, you have to think
Yeah.
about security, you have to think about retry, all those kind of things. Again, all that's built into the SDK.
Yeah.
So what you end up is this kind of custom code that knows how to talk to the API, and that code is in C#, Java, Python, TypeScript, whatever. And then you as an application programmer, you don't have to care about the API. You just code against the SDK. It's in the language that you're using. So the SDK is basically, it's a wrapper around something in the programming language that you're using.
Yeah. No, I like the way how you summarize that. That's really great. And I can think of a good example. I'm sure we'll dig into some, but Cloudinary for image transformation, you can basically, when you generate images with Cloudinary, it generates different URLs and they get cached. So you can say like, I want to have a large image, a small image, maybe apply some AI to center it. There's all kinds of things in there. And you can literally do that all by the URL, but it would be very cumbersome. It's a lot easier to just say, like Cloudinary client dot, I don't know, center head or something, or I don't know the whole SDK, but
But yeah,
yeah,
it's that one word you mentioned, the dot. That to me is what makes an SDK so powerful, because you
yeah,
do, my SDK client dot, and then it gives you this, the IntelliSense in your IDE, unless you're one of those people who uses like Vim without any IntelliSense. But for the rest of us who aren't that level of hardcore, you're in
yeah,
VS Code, you've got whatever programming language of choice you're using, you tap dot, and the autocomplete suggests all the different options. And so in terms of discoverability, how do I use this SDK? I need to do this thing. Okay, well, I tap dot. I want to
hmm
get users. Okay, well, my SDK client dot. Oh, look, there's a get users method. That's probably what I want. Whereas if you're
Yeah.
hitting the API directly, you've got to know the actual URL. So you've got to know there's like /users. And then you've got to
Yeah.
know how
Totally.
to authenticate. Do you have to pass a header? And then as you say, like with Cloudinary, all these different options. How do I pass these options? Are they
Yeah.
in a JSON body? Are they query parameters? If I
Yeah.
spell this wrong, I'm not going to know till I make the request. Whereas in the SDK, it tells me what I have to call it. And
Hmm.
with my SDK, if I'm using a compiled language, then if I spell something wrong, the compiler won't let me run it. Whereas if
Yeah.
I'm making a web request, I could type in any old garbage and not know till I run it and get the response back. And yeah, it's just that whole iterative cycle with an API of try it, I type it wrong, I get it wrong, try again. All that goes
Yeah.
away because of the dot. I tap the dot
Yeah.
and it gives me.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was memorized by the dot when I don't think they might have had like regardless of what people think of .NET or Microsoft, like they have such a great there's lots of great IDEs now, but I was first introduced to I think it was called Visual Studio InterDev. This was prior to Microsoft Visual Studio, and
Hmm.
you had the dot with the IntelliSense. It like I don't know if you work a lot in front end land as well, or you're more focused on like APIs, back end, and the SDKs, but like there's a lot of stuff that's come to the front end land, like pretty much because of TypeScript, because basically if you're using VS Code, like even if you're using JavaScript, it's still using TypeScript to, infer, like not infer, but like say, oh, these are the properties we have available and the refactoring tools and stuff. And it's stuff that's been around for at least 20, like, because I remember using, dot and refactoring back like 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago, maybe even longer. Like Java IDs have this too, and I just remember finding it a little comical once I started using VS Code in the early days, because I used to work in a Microsoft shop, so we started using TypeScript back in 2015, and Visual Studio Code at the time had zero extensions. It was literally like Notepad plus plus with just TypeScript support. Um, but but it was like I kept seeing people say, "Oh, this is amazing! I can refactor this. I can. Oh, there's IntelliSense." And I think a lot of folks that might have done back end languages that were um, compiled languages, they were used to these things for quite a while. So
Hmm.
it always made me chuckle a little bit when people were discovering these things in front end. It's like, yeah, it's been around for a while, but it's good to see it's everywhere though. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. When I first started as a professional programmer, I was doing C++, back in like '99 or whatever it was, and we're using Visual C++
Okay, yeah.
5, I think it was, and they had this thing that's by Whole Tomato Software, and we nicknamed it Rotten Tomato because it was really slow, but it bought that
Okay.
IntelliSense. So you're writing C++ code, and you would do either a dot or the arrow for a pointer, and it would give you the choices. And yeah, this was like
Okay.
24, 25 years ago. And it's just amazing how quickly you could write software with that. Before we had it, you're like, okay, I need to actually go and look at the class definition,
Yeah.
to work out what is I have to do. And then you compile it, and then the compiler will complain. And then, of course, it takes a
Yeah.
couple of minutes to compile it to realize you got it wrong. And then we installed this extension, Whole Tomato. I tap Dart,
Yeah.
and that's it. That's the thing I want. And the it was a massive speed increase.
Yeah. No, totally. And yeah, there's definitely a productivity boost. I think it also this kind of ties into SDKs and documentation because you know when you have the IntelliSense and you hover over the properties or the methods available, you'll usually get a snippet of text, and that's depending on what language you're using. There'll be some sort of documentation, and that'll usually appear as well. And how to I work at a company called Open Source, and we work in the open source space, but we do these Twitter spaces pretty regularly, and we did one on AI. It was like it's a pretty long one, but it was super interesting. And someone I know, Jamin Holmgren, who works at a company called Infinite Red, they do like React Native. He was saying how documentation is going to become even more important because of AI, because it's slurping up all this code, all these docs. So you're probably in a better place in terms of the AI landscape if you actually document your things well. So and who knows, maybe in the future that maybe there'll even be hints like that, some kind of standard in docs that say, this is for AI, or some trigger, to, I don't know, something along those lines. So it's all super important, I think.
You kind of like
So
how now, whenever we're writing web pages, we think about SEO optimization. Soon it's going to
yeah,
be documentation is going to have AI optimization, isn't it? It's how do I build these docs
yeah,
that GitHub
totally.
Copilot or Code Whisperer or whatever can ingest these and actually give me the right hints. And I guess as
Yeah,
well, even the code structure, how do I write code so that
yeah,
when I bring in a library, Copilot can actually look at my code and then intelligently suggest what I need to do next,
yeah, no,
which is something
totally.
that's easier with an SDK because you have code there, but hard with an API because it doesn't know what the API has to do without trying to find
Yeah,
whatever API docs are there.
yeah, exactly. And there's definitely like I know the API. My friend Ryan in the chat saying, isn't the point of AI that it doesn't necessarily require structured data, like specific tags? Uh,
Yes,
th
to a certain degree, yes.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's like prompt engineering, isn't it? So if you've got a really good
Hmm.
prompt, you get the better output. So yes, even though it doesn't necessarily require structured data, I wouldn't be surprised if research is going to show that by having certain structures of data, it's easier for it to pick it up.
Yeah.
And also just for things like, Copilot, for example, where that's going to be looking across the code in your solution,
Hmm.
it's got to then do vector embeddings of that code. So there might be more efficient ways of structuring documentation for an SDK that you've imported into your project that
Yeah.
makes it easier for it to embed and makes it easier for that then to search across it. So yeah, it's a great question, and one there's any AI experts watching. It'd be nice for you to weigh in, but it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to find out in the future is there going to be content engineering to feed
Yeah.
AI the way we're doing prompt engineering now to get the best things out of AI?
Yeah. No, totally. Like everything, it's just tools. At the end of the day, I think at least at this point in the AI journey, I definitely don't trust like I'll copy paste some stuff and then run it, but I definitely look at what's in there before I decide like, okay, this is going in my pull request. I do vet it. But to your point too, about like you were talking about converting like JSON to YAML or vice versa. I also find AI has helped me enormously in terms of like Copilot specifically, like just a lot of boilerplate stuff that are typical things I do every day. Like I'm I'm currently working in React a lot, and when you're building React components, one of the most common things you end up doing is you're mapping over an array to render some kind of UI with state, and it's the same thing all the time pretty much. And Copilot's really good at, oh, okay, you just copied an array variable. I'm gonna generate, a bit of boilerplate for you, and it's little things like that that compound over the day that do speed you up, I find. So it's interesting
Yeah,
times for sure.
there is a little slowdown because when it does get it wrong, you've got to go back and work out what it's got wrong. So, I'm tabbing and I'm filling in all these array values, and then you get to the end, and it just starts making stuff up
Yeah,
because not because it's necessarily looking at your code, but because someone else who's added first name, last name, email,
yeah,
phone
yeah,
number field also adds address, so automatically fills that in regardless of whether or not you have that field. So
yeah.
there's that kind of trade-off. It's like, yes, this bit's faster, and then, as you say, you want to review the pull request a bit because it's not
Yeah.
always
I,
100%.
I
Yeah.
yeah, I think it'll get better. Like I think it'll be more aware of the context because like I know it's Copilot because I know some people at GitHub that were on the DevRel team. My CEO used to be the director of DevRel over there,
Mhm.
but they were saying like have the files that are relevant to what you're working on open as well because Copilot's able to detect that and gather more context to what you're trying to do. So anyway, there's all kinds of stuff. I think it's just a super exciting time, and I could definitely talk about this a lot more, but I think we should probably So now that we've given a really good explainer of what SDKs are, um, where does liblab come into the picture here? Because I know we chatted briefly in DMs on LinkedIn, and you because I was asking you, you were saying it was open source, but it was slightly different. Like I think the licensing or what's available, it's open source. Like maybe touch on that, and then we can actually talk about the project itself.
Yeah, sure. So liblab itself is not an open source project.
Okay.
Everything is closed source. It's one of those we could have very long discussions about whether IP should be open source or not open source. I don't think so. It's if you're like a HashiCorp of this world, it's very easy to make your source open and then not worry too much about competitors stealing it.
Yeah.
What you're selling is the hosting. They've got like a business source license so that you can't make money from it, things like that. With what we do, if all the code was open source, it'd be easy for competitors to leverage our IP, because we kind of make money out of our IP rather than the hosting side of it. So
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
but what we do offer is we want to support open source as much as possible.
Yeah.
And we use a number of open source projects, and it's impossible to sponsor everything. That's just there's so many different projects. It's turtles all the way down. Where do you sponsor? So one way we're looking to give back to open source is essentially giving liblab for free to open source projects.
Okay.
So just kind of frame that a little bit. We have basically a free tier for everyone. We have an expensive paid tier, and then our open source tier is kind of somewhere in between. So you get some of the paid stuff for free, and we will scale that based off the size and reach of your open source project. So if it's a hobby project, you just get for free. If you're a large open source project, we'll give you hands-on support and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, someone just dropped the chat. Write me liblab. Yeah, please don't ask Copilot to write liblab. So actually, I will remind me, and we'll come back to the discussion on using AI for this later on, because I have so many thoughts and so much data on this. But essentially, what liblab does is it automates the generation of SDKs for APIs. So if you have an API, you've got an API, you've said, right, here's all my endpoints. This is the data going back and forward. I now want an SDK for this in Python, TypeScript, .NET, Java, Go, what have you. And then liblab automates the generation of that. It kind of ingests your API specification. Looks through that, reviews the code, works out what's right, what's wrong. When you're kind of happy with what you've got, it will then generate a whole lot of code for you. And it's something that's very customizable about the code that comes out. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to share my screen. And
sure, go for it.
Just for fun, let's go for Inception.
Yeah. All good.
Now we're not Inception anymore. So I've got a little demo here, and I've got a traditional API spec. So if you're an API, then there's a number of ways that you can define what that how that API is kind of documented, as it were. Kind of we're touching on docs earlier on. So one is a thing called Open API. If anyone's not heard of that, you may have heard of Swagger before. So Swagger was the old version. So Swagger goes up to version 2. Open API is like Swagger 3. And onwards. And essentially this defines what's in your API. So you have a little bit of stuff here. You've got a description of what your API does, version number, servers that you run, and then you can define your endpoints. So we're saying I've got a llama endpoint that's llama/anid/picture, or llama. Llama has got a get method on there. And this get method gets llamas. And then this get method, if it's a 200, it returns JSON, which is this llama schema here. And so on and so on and so on. So it kind of provides you this level of documentation. And then all these schemas are defined. You can say, well, look, where are we? Where's llama? So llama, this is what a llama is. It's got a name, it's got an age, it's got a color, it's got a rating, because an ID. So you use this to document your API. And this is kind of really, really good practice to document your APIs, because this can then be used to generate documentation. So I've actually got a web browser here. I've got this documentation that's been generated from my API spec. So if someone's using my API and they need to learn how to use it, here's the docs. I want to
Yeah.
get llamas. Well, okay, here's the llamas. This is the example of what comes back. I can try it out. I can choose to do it on prod. I can then run curl commands and set, oh, I'm getting forbidden because I haven't set my
Yeah, your barrow
register.
token.
So that stuff, you
Yeah.
get this kind of lovely ability to run code in line. So this is kind of just the basics of good API documentation. And there's a load of different ways to do this: Postman collections, blueprint, whatever. Loads of ways to do this. And then what liblab does is it takes this as an input and then it spits out code that maps what you have here.
Okay.
So what you get is, when we talk about this llama, for example, with this, you would get a class that represents the llama.
Yeah.
And then there would be a llama service created with a method get llamas that will give you all the llamas, and then get llama by ID to give you the llama by ID, and so on and so on. This is obviously a very oversimplified description of it, because there's URLs can be hideously complicated. There's a kind of load more stuff you can put in, but essentially that's what it does. Is it builds you the objects to represent the requests and responses, and then builds you services for you to send those requests and get those responses.
Yeah, no, that's super cool.
Yeah, it's the cool part is not just the basics. The cool part is all the stuff under the hood it does, the kind of the middleware that sits in between. So things like authentication. If you're authenticating something, you have to put authentication header on every single time.
Yeah.
Well, no, not with this. You just set it once, and then in the authentication middleware, essentially, we'll set that on every single request. So every time you make a request, it knows what you've got to do. In fact, actually, in the API spec, if I just zip over to my API spec in here, we can define the fact that, if I got it in the spec, where's my security? Yeah. So here, I define the fact there's a bearer token in my spec. And so it knows that, and it will then give me an API, give me an SDK where I pass the bearer token, it will send that with every single request. And there's kind of so much more that kind of sit in the middle. And it's obviously, this seems a very simple idea of, hey, yes, you have just, it's a llama, it has some fields, this is simple.
Yeah.
But then it gets really complicated, because OpenAPI has got a load of weird quirks where you can do things like, it's either this or this or this or this, or it's all of this thing and this thing. You can say, this gives me a llama and a alpaca, and it gets both. And so the liblab will actually look at what data is coming back and will actually construct the right thing for you. Whether if it's a this or this, we return you some kind of union type. If it's this and this, we will build custom objects and kind of all this kind of stuff to do it for you.
Super cool. Yeah.
So
and this is super interesting, because we have an API open source, and it is using Swagger. So we do have the open API spec like you're showing here. So definitely not immediately after this stream, but I'm definitely going to look into liblab to generating an SDK to see, because I know we had talked about it. It was so I'm curious for. I know you can't give away the IP, obviously, but like under the hood, like, because like and there, I'll get to, Ryan has a question about, is it limited to REST APIs? We can get to that in a second. I'm curious, like, from a technical standpoint, I imagine you're taking the spec and then like you can generate some kind of a abstract syntax tree, and then you can just convert it to different languages, or is that kind of the process without giving away the secret sauce? Or if you don't want to give away the secret sauce at all, don't worry about it.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Okay.
So we take all the data in the API spec, and we also use configuration as well. So we have a configuration file that we use to define the various rules for what you want to create. And we kind of take these two together, and then we build a representation of your API, and that's got things like the objects that are there, the endpoints that you're calling, and then how we represent the data in terms of, oh, well, this thing is this and this, or it's this or this, and this thing, this response is used here, here, and here. So it's kind of shared between
Okay.
here. We kind of build up this big representation of what it looks like. And then we map that to the different languages that we support. At the moment, we support essentially 6 languages, well, 5 languages plus Terraform. So we do Python, TypeScript, C#, Go, Java, and then Terraform as well. That kind of sits on top of our Go provider. And of course, each language has its own quirks and idioms. And in Python, you can represent a union using a union, whereas in C#, there's no such thing as a union. So how do we support open API one-off types, which are unions, by building various wrapper classes? So there's kind of a lot of magic that goes on to kind of take this really complicated tree and then convert that into each language. So it's there is definitely a lot of complexities that I don't understand inside our code. We've got a lot of very smart people who've been working really hard on this problem, because open API is a very open, very generic specification, and there's so many quirks to it that just trying to work out how do you do the right thing is hard. Even what may seem like simple stuff can be hard if you have naming. If you have a name on your llama that's called type, for example, that's a reserved word in some languages.
Oh,
So it's just, how do you deal with reserved words? Because you can't expose that in the SDK because it's a reserved word, but you have to internally expose that. So how do you come up with good naming conventions? There's kind of a lot of magic that we do, which is why we support a lot of customizations, because everyone's going to have certain things on there. So we're constantly building out our customizations because everyone wants something a little bit different. Our goal with this is to make an SDK that looks like you wrote it, rather than an SDK that looks like we wrote it.
Gotcha.
We don't want to have our name all over your SDK. We want your SDK to be yours. You own it. It's your code. Because we just want you to be proud of what you create, and we want to help you deliver a good SDK to your customers.
I can, even though I haven't tried the product yet, this sounds like very promising for what I need to do. Our stuff's open source, but like even as like if it wasn't open source, this sounds like a compelling tool to use, because it's always funny with devs. It's like, oh well, why are we going to pay for that? We'll build it ourselves. But then it's like, how many people work on this, and then what are the and engineering is typically the most expensive part in a software org. So like you go down that rabbit hole, and I would probably say most of the time you're probably going to spend more on that effort than the actual product, like something like liblab. Like, I don't know the numbers, I don't know pricing for liblab, but I can't picture it being more than like if you threw like 4 engineers working on this for months or something, or I don't know.
Oh yeah. It saves you so much time and money. I mean, the kind of the average flow you have as an engineer is, as long as your open API spec is good, because obviously if your API spec is garbage, then you'll always get garbage out. But so you need to improve your API spec, but you'd have to do that whether or not you're using liblab or building an SDK yourself. But once your spec is good, the configuration can take maybe a couple of hours as you try different options, because you want to get the configuration right. So you might try a few options, generate SDK, play with the SDK. So maybe a morning over coffee, and then after that, each build. I mean, I'm gonna just do run a build, show you how quick it is. Just going to log me in because I'm running this in a container, so I'm not logged in. Give me a second while I just log into liblab. Done. That's logged in. Once you actually get going with it, it takes like seconds to build an SDK. So you spend your morning going through the configuration, getting it working. And then, within seconds, you've got an SDK. And then if you make a change to your API, because it's not just about building it once. And that's the thing. People say, oh, I can build an SDK. Yeah, but you need to maintain the SDK. Yes, overwrite it. Yeah, that's it. I've just built a Python SDK. Done. And then the maintenance, if I add a new endpoint, takes a few seconds to generate. I can put this in a CI/CD pipeline. And then every time I update my spec, I get a new SDK.
Yeah, no, that's
So,
amazing.
um,
There's, I didn't want to skip. Ryan in the chat on
hmm,
Twitch had a couple questions.
yeah.
Um, so the first one was, is this used, or actually maybe he has three questions. I think the first one he was, is this limited to REST APIs?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and and
At the
and kind
moment,
of
we're just doing REST. Yeah.
okay. And um, he's also saying, is this used mostly for external APIs, or do you find customers using it internally as well? I would assume internally because you're generating your own SDK, or
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of so many different use cases for this. So sometimes it is external. I
okay.
have a SaaS platform. Yeah, startups, for example, they've got an API for their SaaS platform and they need an SDK now. They want it like
Hmm.
as in yesterday. Okay, sign up with liblab. You have your SDK by the end of the day. Done.
Yeah.
It's kind of that quick. But when we think about a lot of enterprises that have a bajillion different microservices,
Hmm.
there's all these APIs. How do you access them? You are a new team that's been spun up. You're building something in C# and you've got to access these APIs.
Hmm.
I mean, how many times have you had to build a layer of abstraction? You're trying to build against a microservice. Here's the API spec. You build a layer of abstraction. That team over there has built the same layer of abstraction. That team over there has built the same layer of abstraction. New API comes out. All
Yeah.
layers of abstraction, it just becomes a mess. So internally, build an SDK. So when you publish an API,
Yeah.
you publish a whole set of SDKs that kind of that go with it. So yes, internal as well. And then also, if you're like a systems integrator,
Okay.
your job is to you have to build a system that connects this payment system and this whatever. Like a consultant, you're working, come into a company, you need to integrate a third-party payment system with a third-party HR system with an internal system. You're using one language. You probably want a bunch of SDKs that are very similar to each other. So again,
Okay.
you can just take all those endpoints, generate SDKs just for your personal use to do
Okay.
the integration work that you have to do between systems.
Okay.
So
Cool.
it's literally, I'm selling an API, or I've got an API that I want to give away and I want to give you an SDK, or it's I need to use this API, I want an SDK. So it's kind of anyone who wants those kind of SDK can do that. And just the fact that if you set the same configuration options, you'll end up with kind of an idiomatically similar SDK across all your APIs.
Hmm.
So if
Okay.
you're bringing 10 APIs together, you don't have to learn how this SDK works and this SDK works and this SDK works, which might be very confusing. You just want to
Hmm.
say, look, here's these APIs. Just give me SDKs that are basically the same, so I can bring my code together.
Okay. Um, and then there's another question. Ryan's got a lot of great questions here today.
Yeah.
So he says he's pretty sure that Swagger generates SDKs as well. So how does it differ? And I think some of what you alluded to before might be that differentiation, which is you allow customization. There's a lot of like edge cases, like you were saying, like type is a reserved word and so on. Is that, is that like, I guess, if you had to give the elevator pitch, if somebody said, why can't I just use the SDK generation from Swagger, I guess, is kind of what
Yeah,
he's
no,
getting to.
it's a great question. It's one we get asked a lot. So I mean, the first one obviously is support model.
Okay.
So love open source, but if your enterprise is depending upon something, what's the support model? Who can you phone up and shout at 3 in the morning if something's broken? We have someone you can phone up and shout at 3 in the morning. I mean, please don't shout at him. He's a nice chap. But you know what I mean? But that kind of support model is something we offer. And it's not
Okay.
just if it goes wrong, phone us up and shout at us. It's the whole kind of white glove experience. You have an
Okay.
API. You don't have the time to build an SDK. How can we help?
Yeah.
You throw money at us and we can even help you build the SDKs for you. We can review your API spec.
Okay.
Some people create API specs. I was chatting to someone who's working for a SaaS platform, and he was saying their API spec is awful.
Okay.
So it's what could if liblab went in there, we could then help with the API spec. We can review the spec, kind of give that expertise. We've got some
Okay.
some top-notch experts in open API, so we're going to help you get your spec right. We're going to help you think about the architecture of your APIs. If you have 3 different teams with APIs, what do they share? How can we help you structure your APIs to work with that? Yeah, and then build the right
Okay.
SDKs for you. So there's kind of that kind of white glove experience, that kind of consultancy that we can do. But
Yeah.
also just in terms of the actual product, we think ours is better. You know, we've
Okay.
put a lot of time into creating kind of the highest quality that we can do. We've thought long and hard about what is the smallest set of dependencies we can have, so that you're not dependent on too many other libraries in case there's security vulnerabilities that you then have to manage.
Yeah.
You know, how do we think about the features that make things a lot easier for you to use, like automatic dev container generation, so you can just open up your SDK in a dev container and just test it out.
Yeah.
And, you know, how do we think about representing these more complex objects, these one-ofs, any-ofs, all-of types in a really friendly way? And so, yeah, we think we are better because, you know, capitalist hat on now, we're driven by money. You know, we're
Yeah.
paid to
Yeah.
make it better than what Swagger can do. So, yes, there are some great tools out there. No disrespect to those tools. They're really, really good. But, you know, we think we are better in terms
Yeah.
of what we create.
No, there's definitely nothing wrong with that, and there's definitely nothing wrong with making money either, you know? I mean, it sounds like you enjoy what you do. I enjoy what I do too, but I do like to get paid as well. So,
Oh yes. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
if I had unlimited monies, I would probably still do what I do for fun. But you know,
Yeah.
until that happens, someone's got to pay for all this Lego. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. That Lego doesn't pay itself. You
Yep.
know, if Jim's got to, blow up the Death Star behind him, that's not a one Starbucks coffee. That's like a couple paychecks potentially. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, especially this Millennium Falcon. This one is
Oh wow, I
this
didn't
one
see
is
that.
like 20 or 18 years old, and you know, them ain't cheap. Those on Amazon
Yeah.
now are thousands for those. So you know,
Wow.
can't just do it for coffee.
Um, yeah, Ryan still got lots of great questions. He's I promise you he's not grilling you. He's just generally
I
curious
know.
here.
It's all good. It's
Uh,
all good. Please, I mean, I'm
yeah,
glad you're joining the conversation, Ryan. Thank you for this.
yeah. He's curious about what about integrating auditing or like security and performance? Is that something that can be included through your services?
So yes, it takes a little bit of work
Okay.
because everyone's requirements are different for this. So, I mean, things like security we have built in. You know, you want to do bearer tokens, what have you, all that kind of stuff's built in. But obviously, if you want to get a lot more things in there, we actually have a whole system. We call it hooks, which allows you to hook into the whole
Okay.
request response flow. And so, what you can do is, in fact, oh, I'll just show you some code.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Download some hooks here. So you can write what we call hooks. So every time a request is sent, obviously,
Okay.
there is a request object that has got the body that we're sending. There's things like the actual method you're hitting, the URL, the various headers, and obviously
Hmm.
that gets sent over the API call. And then what comes back is a response with headers and status codes and data and what have you. And you can hook into that process. So you can write
Okay.
any code that you want in that request response cycle. So
Okay.
before a request is sent, if you wanted to do some kind of logging, you could put in here, you know, you chat to someone. Oh, you were chatting to someone from Sentry the other day, weren't you? So we could do, you know,
Yeah.
log to Sentry, for
Okay.
example. You could put that into the SDK yourself, or you
Okay.
could, you know, complex auth. Yeah, one example is OAuth. You know, based off a client ID and client secret, this can go and manage all your tokens for you. So it can go off.
Okay.
You can write the code to go and hit your OAuth server, and you could say, look at the request based off the URL in the request. I need to go to a different authentication server. You know, if my URL
Yeah.
is Europe, I need to go to the European server. If it's US, I need to go to US authentication, whatever you want, and then do that authentication flow. You know, and
Okay.
only do that if I'm not hitting a token endpoint because I'm already doing that, all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of really build a whole lot of
Okay.
complicated logic in here to handle that. It also
Okay.
means you could extend your API. So if you
Okay.
want to
Cool.
add a
Yeah.
feature that's not on the API, you could do that through the hook. So you could say, well, you know, I have this particular type with this enum that I've got set, I want to add a new value to it that internally maps to something else. So you add it to the
Okay.
spec, generate the SDK, write that logic here in the hooks to then mutate that back to a supported type, and
Okay.
then do whatever you have to handle. I was looking at one the other day this was for storage, and it kind of out the box supported a number of different storage types, and it
Okay.
didn't support one particular cloud storage. So I added it to the API spec, and then in the hooks, if it's this cloud storage, this is how you build a magic URL for it, and then just pretend it's an external, just a generic external storage. So there's kind of a lot more things you can do with that, and then you can change the data that gets sent, change the data that comes back. Also great if there's a breaking change in your API and you don't want to bring that breaking change through to the SDK. You can just say, well, my SDK is expecting to return an object with first name and last name. The API has now changed to return me full name. In my response, I will break that in half and then populate the two fields. Things like that. So you kind of got this way to hook in under the hood. And again, going back to the question about why are we better than a free solution is, well, we can help you write these hooks. Again, we can help you build this customization in, which is kind of very powerful capability.
Yeah,
We've done some, I can't dig into too much because working with customers, we've done some pretty cool stuff with these hooks to do whatever weird, wacky, wonderful things that people want.
Yeah, and I guess this is this is pretty much kind of like middleware, like you were saying before, I think. It's the same concept. Like I used to work at Netlify, and like you have this concept of we have like edge functions, and you can run them before or after. A lot of frameworks have middleware anyways, like any language. So this is super cool. And I guess the nice thing about this is you have the contract of how the hook's written. So like you were saying, you can literally do whatever you want as long as you respect that contract of the hook. So, which could be super weird stuff, but it's kind of neat. And like you could even add like I'm sure people have done this already using your product, but like adding maybe extra validation, or maybe their API. They didn't. I mean, hopefully their API supports validation when you hit the endpoints, but I guess you could do some kind of extra validation if you needed to, or basically anything like you said. It's really literally whatever your client wants to do. So
yeah, I mean the validation one's actually an interesting one. So you can have in a spec, you can actually have validation rules built in. So for example, if I look at rating, I can specify my API spec that rating has a maximum of 5, minimum of 1. And we can build that. We will automatically build that into the SDK. So in the SDK, if you set rating to be 6, you will get an SDK error before it even goes to the API. So we can do some validation, but obviously that's not all validation. We can't do everything. And if you don't have an API spec, we can't know about it. But if you wanted to do validation, because obviously every API call is expensive. I mean, fractions of % potentially, but every time someone calls your API, you have to run some code. So if there's common mistakes people are making, you could write those validations in the SDK, give them smart error messages in the SDK, and the call doesn't even hit your server.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're not wasting that bandwidth. You're like stopping it before it even leaves. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you think about like AI services, for example. You buy 100 image generations. For example, you spend $10, you get 100 image generations. You don't want to waste 10 of those image generations because you're sending the wrong data. So if you can write those validations in the hooks, your prompt needs to be a minimum of 100 characters, what have you. Okay, let's write that in the hook. Done. And then it doesn't even hit the API. It doesn't use any of your tokens, your 100 images. So there's kind of a lot you can do to improve the developer experience for your users through this kind of validation. And then, things like tracking, you want to log SDK calls. There's no point in us trying to implement that in liblab because everyone does things differently. So, you would end up having 1,000 different customization options, and it'll take you longer to work out how to customize it for how you want than it would do to come in here and just write a couple lines of code and log it.
No, I think that's smart. You obviously have a well-defined product in terms of the contract that the SDK can generate. But it's the good old open close principle kind of it, like you know, it's extensible, but you know, you can't modify it internally. You're just letting people hook in their own stuff, you know, as opposed to you supporting a billion. Well, one, if you supported all, like if you said, okay, we support Sentry, we support LogRocket, we support this, you know, all of a sudden it's a lot more burden on your team to manage that, you know. And like you
Mm.
said, because everybody's different, I think it makes total sense that you just say like, bring your own, and here's where you can do it. That makes total sense to me. Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in the future, if we spot various patterns in how people are doing things, then it might lead us to add more customizations. Yeah,
yeah,
but everyone's so many things are done so differently. It's easier just to give people the ability to do this. And things you
yeah,
write your hooks once, and then they're compiled into the SDK.
okay,
So these don't sit anywhere. They don't sit webside, nothing like that. It's not like we're intercepting your API requests on our servers, nothing like that. This
okay,
gets built into your SDK. So this code will sit in your SDK that gets shipped to everyone.
yeah, okay, yeah. And Ryan's got some more great questions. So, are the hooks implemented via a plugin model or as an external webhook service? I don't think it's an external webhook service, obviously, from what you just said. So,
Yeah,
um,
this just goes into your SDK. So I mean, if I just build this again, I know we haven't kind of looked into the SDK, but this is kind of the SDK that would build in a second. Now that I've added the hooks, I'll show you. Just give it a second to build. Yeah, so as I say, this code is sent. We send the API spec and the configuration file and the hooks code up to our servers, generate the SDK. It's built, gets downloaded, gets embedded in there. So in a second. Oh, yes, overwrite. There we go.
and
So
while you're
what we end
building
up with
that,
is there we go. So in my actual output, this is where it all comes out. This is my Python SDK. So this is the SDK that will be compiled up into the wheel that you would then ship. And you see it's got
mhm,
the 2 comments that I added in there.
okay, yeah,
So it's part of the SDK. It's not, there's no plugin as such that the user can control. There's no external web service. It just becomes a part of the SDK. And actually in
okay,
the SDK, if I look at, where are we? In the HTTP clients, it's in here somewhere. Yeah, so we
okay,
have a hook. So what we'll do, there's like a delete method. This wraps an HTTP delete. We build up the request of the hooks. We send it to the hooks. We get
hmm
back the response from the hooks, and then use that to make the call. And then we do the
okay.
hook after this response.
Uh,
So it's all just embedded deep inside the SDK.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. Another great question from Ryan.
Mhm,
If say you implement hooks, like say I create a hook where I want to bring in Sentry or something,
mhm.
um, it's you know, liblab can obviously generate the SDK with my hook. Do I need to write that custom hook in each language that I want to generate the SDK? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, because each language has its own idioms, its own dependencies. You want to log to Sentry, for example. I would
Yeah.
then use the pip package. So inside my Python options in here, I would then have I can define my dependencies for the pip package, so I know
Okay.
what package I need. But obviously for Go, it's going to be different. For C Sharp, it's going to be different.
Okay.
So yeah, you write it in one language, and then that code goes into the Python. So you have to then write it in all the other
Okay.
languages, because
Yeah.
otherwise we have to try and take Python code, compile that down, run that in Go, and it's just not what we want to do. I
Yeah.
guess we're going back to our Copilot thing earlier on.
Yeah.
Select this code, go into Copilot chat, rewrite in Go, rewrite in
Yeah. Yeah.
C
It's true.
Sharp,
It's true.
and it will spit it out. But yes, you do have to do it all
Yeah.
manually. But
I,
each language
I
is different. It's
yeah.
yeah,
I don't think that's like I think that's a good trade-off, you know, like the effort to generate it, like you said, for each language, it maybe in the future it's worth it, but like for now it doesn't make sense. And I think that's totally fine. I think the other thing that's cool about this is because like sometimes teams will, there'll be a team dedicated to maintaining the .NET SDK, the Java SDK, and with this, there's no team. It's like you might have one, maybe two engineers building the custom hooks, maybe. Somebody built the API obviously and generated a spec. But then after that, you can literally say like, okay, well, like I can't remember how many languages you said it supports, but like pretty much I see like most of the big ones, Go, Python, .NET, Java, whatever. But you can literally just in your CI/CD pipeline, you just say, okay, go generate all of the SDKs for all those languages, and it's just nice.
Mhm.
It's a lot of burden removed from you, the developer, So I think that's another compelling reason. Um,
Oh yeah, you think if you're like a small startup, yeah, you
yeah,
don't have time to build all these SDKs out, but your customers want them. Well, there you go. In the morning, you got it working, done. If you're a
yeah,
large enterprise, you want to ship APIs. Chances are someone being given time to build the different SDKs.
yeah,
Probably not. It's everyone's cost cutting, so you just generate them. Yeah, I hesitate to say you don't need the team because
yeah.
there's this time of
That's it.
year
Yeah,
where teams are being let go, and there's always that worry
yeah,
of, is this going to replace my job? I think it allows you to get people to focus on more important tasks
yeah.
because
Totally.
creating an SDK majority of the time is just donkey work. It's, you have to
Yeah,
write this code that takes this object and builds it up from some JSON or converts it to JSON, and then you have to write this code to make the call. It's not exciting work, and
yeah,
engineers can deliver so much more value than building these SDKs. And obviously,
yeah.
there are some
Totally.
times where SDKs have got some really bizarre things or really powerful features that can't be generated, in which
Hmm.
case you need an SDK team.
Yeah,
You're writing the SDK for a database. You're not necessarily going to be having REST requests that you can make. You're going to be doing all manner of different things to get data streaming back and forward as quickly as possible and handling optimized whatever. So some more complicated SDKs, you need the team of people to build it. But for the
yeah,
ones that are not that complicated, which is probably the 90% of them, this allows engineers to focus on more important tasks.
yeah. No, thanks for calling that out. Yeah, like I should have picked my words a little wisely when I said that, but yeah, I definitely because like I it's the same thing with like when people say like AI is going to take your jobs. I don't think it is. It's what you just said, which is it's going to do some grunt work that I no longer need to do, but that means I'm able to focus on more important problems and like deliver more business value by not having to do that grunt work. But yeah,
Yeah, any company that's laying people off thinking they're saving money by by using AI or whatever kind of tools, well, you're just slowing yourself down, because the companies
yeah,
that are not laying people off are using those people to solve more important problems. They're moving faster
hmm,
than you are. The
yeah,
amount of software we have to deliver is going up and up and up all the time. And so don't think of it as replacing jobs. Think of it as allowing you to deliver more of the software that we need.
yeah. Oh, totally, totally. I'm surprised nobody in the chat has asked, how are you able to work with your light theme, but in the editor.
So, light themes are actually slightly more accessible.
Yeah,
Um, so, if you have astigmatism, you may notice when you're driving at night, you'll see like headlights are kind of blurred. That's an effect
yeah,
called halation. It's caused by having very light things on a dark background. So
okay,
when you're using dark mode, you can actually get halation. So if you've got astigmatism, it's actually slightly harder to read.
hmm,
I flip between light and dark mode depending on how my eyes are feeling and the time of day.
yeah,
But also, it's generally found that for for presenting, more people can read light mode than can read dark mode. So by doing it in
yeah,
light mode, yes, you get the, oh, it's in light mode, you should be in dark mode type thing, but
yeah,
actually it's makes it more accessible for the audience as a whole.
yeah. No, it's kind of not funny, but like I, because like a lot of like the web development I do, you have to take accessibility into account, and
Mhm.
I, I was I was using some pretty accessible dark themes, but then at one point I switched to light theme for streaming, and I've kind of gone back to dark theme at the moment, but I think I'll go back at least for streaming to the light theme for like what you said, just because like if it makes it more accessible to others, you know, why not, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I like you. I flip. Some apps I will only use in light mode. I can't stand Notion in dark mode for some reason. Notion in light mode is a thing of beauty. I just don't like it in dark mode. Other things I
Yeah,
do dark mode. But yeah, with VS Code, a majority of the time I'm now in light mode just because it's slightly easier on my eyes. And yeah, it's better for if I'm streaming or if I'm recording. It's just slightly easier for people to see, because if you do have an astigmatism and you get that halation, you kind of
yeah,
end up struggling to read, and you're there zooming in and kind of you're in there trying to make it out.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
no, this is super cool. I dropped a link to liblab again. So I guess for we've got about. I definitely want to be mindful of your time. I know you have a meeting in about 18 minutes, so we can definitely finish a few minutes earlier, just because if you need a bathroom break before your meeting. But I guess like if somebody wanted to get started with liblab today, what's the best course of action? Like obviously they go to liblab.com, but like what's I guess the two paths. If I'm somebody who's just interested, like I just want to check this out because maybe my company might use it, and also yeah, I guess the open source route and the paid route, like I think it's good to show the pricing for people if they are interested in, if they're not an open source project, because at least based on everything we've chatted about here, this product seems like a very valuable and time-saving, you know, piece of software. So I think it's probably worth the price, whatever it is. Like getting back to what I was saying about you throwing like a ton of people working on SDKs. So
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely worth the price. So from liblab.com, we have our pricing up here. We basically have three tiers that we do. So
okay,
our developer tier is free. So
okay,
the idea behind that is you sign up and then you just start building SDKs. We
okay,
don't put any limits on that. So with any language we support, all your APIs, we just go. It's not going to cost you anything to get going. But with
okay,
that, you don't get some of our more advanced features.
okay,
Yeah, we're building out a lot of cool stuff. So, you don't really get that support for some more advanced features. And as we add more enterprise level features, you're not going to get access to those on the free tier. So
yeah,
it's
that makes
enough to get you
sense.
started building some pretty powerful SDKs.
Okay,
Also, you don't get support. So we have a Discord server you can jump on, ask a question, and we don't guarantee we'll help you. Yeah, we'll do our best, but it's free, so there's no support. So
yeah,
it's basic community support, but it's all our stuff, so you can build it. We have the ability to integrate with your CI/CD pipeline,
okay,
all that kind of stuff. But we do kind of ask that any SDKs you generate are MIT licensed. So we
okay,
obviously, this is a trust thing.
yeah,
We then obviously have the paid one, which is what do you need? How much money are you interested in spending? So that's where we can build the hooks for you. We can implement SLAs. We can do API reviews.
okay,
The whole lot. And obviously, that's as much as you want to spend for the level of support that you want to get.
okay.
Some enterprises want to make sure they've got someone they can phone up and shout at. Please don't shout at anyone in our company. We don't like that. That's not nice.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
you want to better have that point of contact, and if you do that, then we have dedicated Slack channels, early access previews, all that kind of stuff going forward. And then
Okay,
our open source tier, this kind of sits between the two. So this is for open source projects where this is a trust-based thing, but basically you're not making money out of your project. You can
yeah,
accept money for sustainability. So you're getting sponsorship, things like that, but you're not the HashiCorp of this world, for example, with a business source license where your open source software is your product. So if
hmm,
you're an open source project like that, then you will get a lot more support, a lot more help, input into our public roadmap in the future, dedicated support. And again, we would structure that based off the size of your open source project. So if it's
Okay.
just someone has built an API for fun, and no one's using it, they've got 1 star on GitHub from their mum, then we're
Thanks,
not gonna.
Mom.
Yeah, we all love our mums here. Mums are awesome. We're
Yeah.
not going to spend days and days and days with you helping to tweak your open API spec. But obviously, if you're a larger project with a lot of users, then obviously we will help you. It's all based on what impact we can give to the community. So the bigger the community you
Okay.
reach, the more we will want to help you to impact that community. At the end of the day, we
Okay.
love open source. We can't pay everybody who writes the open source projects that we use because there's millions of them. And this is one of our ways that we want to give back to open source is, kind of paying it forward. So if you've got a big project and people are using it and your open source users want SDKs, then how can we help you? How can we help you get those SDKs in the hands of people?
Okay. Yeah, Ryan, who's had lots of great questions today, says, "I know it's 3 a.m., but needed to tell you I love liblab." So I think you've 100% convinced Ryan about the product. So
Awesome, Ron. Yeah, I'm assuming this zero price is good for you, makes you happy. But yeah, I mean, anyone can sign up. Literally, liblab.com.
Okay.
From here, get started. And then you just go in here and you can sign up. We have a whole web portal where you can track all your builds, things like that. I'm going to close this down because I've got admin access and I don't want you to accidentally show you any of our customers.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have full documentation with all the stuff on how it all works, all the user guides that you need so you can join our Discord, jump on there, ask us any questions. And yeah, we want to just help you build really good quality SDKs. I'm not a fan of writing API code. A number of times I've made mistakes because I've put the wrong fields in my JSON or I've put the wrong example I gave it a talk the other day is when you create a user and you put username and it should be email. I've made those dumb mistakes all the time.
Yeah.
But with an SDK, you don't make those dumb mistakes. So, I'm a big fan of this. This is why I moved from Microsoft to liblab, is because I love what they're trying to do. And awesome. The fact it's free, if that's what Ryan's budget is, it's free, then it's perfect. So get signed up, get building.
Yeah, no, that's a testament to the company. I mean, you left, I'm assuming a good job at Microsoft to pursue this. So it's, and I know I don't really know you, but I can tell your genuine enthusiasm about the product, and it's come out very clear to me that like you're super pumped about this product. So, which is nice to see, like I'm kind of the same way. This is why I could never be a salesperson. Like I could only be a salesperson if I 100% believed in a product. Because like I have friends who are in sales and I'm like, I couldn't do that, like I'd be like, it's not really that good, this thing's missing or whatever. But like when you're working on something and you're hyped about it and it comes across, it definitely sends good vibes. And this really does look like a compelling project, and I'm seriously going to look into it because I was talking to B. Dougie, who's our CEO, and we have a API. It is MIT licensed, so we can generate it. But like you were saying too, like even if you had an open source license, like MIT license, but you wanted more support, that's obviously still a possibility, right? Like, okay, no, this is super interesting. Yeah.
No, we want to have everyone build SDKs. So yeah, we're here to help. If you're making a huge amount of money off it, then obviously pay us. We're here to help. But if it's open source projects, then let us help you. That's how we want to give back.
Super cool, awesome. And I guess I'll drop links to where you are again for folks interested. I know we've got about 10 minutes to the calendar stop here, but like I said, I do want to be mindful of your time, like if you want to take a short bathroom break before your next meeting. But I guess as we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to say? I mean, I think I learned a lot today, and I think you covered everything really well. So thanks for that. But if there's anything additional, or like, should people Venmo you money for some more Lego or whatever's
Well, I do have if you go to linktree.com/Jim Bennett, there is a link on there to an Amazon wish list if anyone wants to buy me any Star Wars
Oh,
Lego.
okay, there you go. There you go. Yeah, so yeah.
but no, seriously, if you have an API, you're doing your users a disservice without giving them an SDK. The developer experience for an SDK is so much nicer than
Yeah.
an API, and it's not that much effort to build an API. Once you've got the configuration done, it just builds, and then you update your API and you build an SDK, and it's done. So think about your users. Spread some love to your users and build them an SDK. And
Cool,
the fact you can say you can get going for free, why wouldn't you? It's almost Valentine's Day. In 9 days' time,
Yeah.
it's Valentine's Day. So show some love towards your users and build them an SDK.
Yeah, and don't forget to thank your mom for starring that repo.
Yeah. Yep. I'm always thanking my mum for holding my hand when we're typing in code on the ZX Spectrum. But otherwise, thank you, mum, for starring your repo. Lots of love to all the mums out there.
Yeah, here we go. That's awesome. I just want to thank you again, Jim. It was super awesome hanging out with you. Just wanted to mention for the schedule, I'm going to be hanging out with Joshua Goldberg on Friday. We're going to dig into some more TypeScript and ESLint, and we're going to dig into, Josh wrote a blog post recently about you don't need the configs for Prettier or the plugin with ESLint now. So we're going to dig into that on a live stream on Friday. And then my usual stream time on Mondays, I'm off next week because I'm going snowboarding, but the following week we'll be back, and I'm going to be hanging with the creator of Polyplane, which is a front-end development tool for building responsive web apps. So check that out. I dropped a link in the chat, and yeah, thanks again, Jim. And if you don't mind just staying on for a second, and everybody else, thanks so much. Lots of great questions today. Ryan is a convert, and we'll see you all on Friday.
Cool, thanks, everyone.
Jim. Later.